What if the person you least expect is the one who holds the key to saving the world? Meet Elijah Brooks, a man who drives a taxi by day, but behind the wheel, he's hiding a secret that could change the course of history. A Nobel Prize-winning scientist, working in silence to develop groundbreaking climate technology, and all while being dismissed by everyone as just another average driver. But when he gives a ride to a professor who unknowingly insults people like him, everything begins to unravel. Elijah must decide whether to keep his revolutionary work hidden in the shadows or risk exposing it to a world that doesn't yet understand its power. This is The Man Behind the Meter, a story about secrets, resilience, and the quiet force that could reshape the future. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories like this one. And if you've ever had to hide your true potential, let us know in the comments below how you've overcome it. We'd love to hear your story. Now sit back, relax, and let's get started with the man behind the meter. In the heart of Colorado, Elijah Brooks lives a double life. On the surface, he's just another unassuming taxi driver, often dismissed by passengers as unintelligent. But beneath this quiet exterior, Elijah is a brilliant scientist who once won a Nobel Prize. Haunted by past losses and driven by a deep desire to change the world, Elijah has retreated from the spotlight, choosing to build a groundbreaking climate technology in secret. When he picks up a seemingly ordinary professor one day, the conversation takes an unexpected turn. The professor, unknowingly insulting people like him, sparks a revelation that shocks them both. As the world begins to close in, seeking answers to Elijah's mysterious project, Elijah faces a choice: continue working in the shadows or step into the light and risk losing everything. The Man Behind the Meter is a tale of resilience, integrity, and the quiet power of choosing your own path. A journey of science, secrecy, and self-discovery, it reminds us that sometimes the most profound change comes from those who operate outside the system, quietly reshaping the future one step at a time. Will Elijah's work save the world, or will the forces of power and control prove too strong? Keep listening to find out. Disclaimer: the story you're about to watch is entirely fictional. While it is based on themes of resilience, integrity, and innovation, the characters, events, and scenarios presented are purely imagined and do not represent any real individuals or occurrences. This video is intended to provide moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and opportunities for personal growth and learning. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. We encourage you to engage with the story as a source of reflection and insight, and to take away valuable lessons that resonate with you. Thank you for watching. The streets of Denver woke up slowly that morning, covered in a layer of frost that clung to windshields and sidewalks like a silent warning. The cold had teeth, but the sun was trying to smile anyway, rising lazily behind the distant mountain range. The city stretched and yawned, exhaling smoke from chimneys and steam from storm drains as its people began their day. Elijah Brooks was already at the wheel. His cab was warm, not from the heat vents, though they were humming, but from something else. A kind of stillness, a peace. He had made this morning ritual his own. Car cleaned, coffee in a thermos, seatbelt buckled like a gentleman tipping his hat. Elijah drove a 12-year-old Crown Victoria, yellow with black trim and a roof light that buzzed faintly. It was one of the last few still on the road, a dinosaur in a city trying to look sleek. The meter worked fine though. That was what mattered. The meter and the silence. He liked the early rides best. The ones where people were too sleepy to talk, too focused on their phones or thoughts to notice him. It gave him room to breathe, room to watch. Elijah had always been a watcher. A call came through the dispatcher. Pick up, Denver International. Drop off, University of Colorado campus. Name, Professor Daniel Whitmore. Elijah tapped his screen and turned onto the highway, merging with ease, one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the console. The city moved past him, unaware. Just another cab. Just another driver. That's how he liked it. By the time he reached the arrival zone, the professor was already waiting, tall, lean, wrapped in a wool coat and preoccupied with a tablet. He looked up once, briefly, scanning for his ride, then made his way over. You Daniel? Elijah asked through the roll-down window. Yes. You're from Mile High Cabs. That's right. Hop in. The professor loaded his suitcase into the trunk with a grunt and slid into the back seat. He smelled faintly of leather and cologne. Expensive, polished, like a man who wore his success as a second skin. Heading to the university, Daniel said, not looking up from his tablet. The science symposium. Shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, right? Depends on traffic, Elijah replied, checking his mirrors. but I'll get you there. They pulled away from the curb, merging again onto the freeway. For a few moments, the only sound was the low hum of tires on asphalt. Daniel was reading something on his screen, eyebrows pulled tight. Elijah glanced in the rearview mirror, then looked away. Been to Denver before? Elijah asked, voice steady, casual. A few times, Daniel answered, distracted. Usually just for these conferences. I prefer cities with more, let's say, intellectual atmosphere. Elijah offered a soft hum in reply. Non-committal. Let the man speak. Daniel took it as invitation. These regional events are more political than academic, he said, voice sharper now. A lot of showboating. The same faces every year. And lately, I don't know. The field's changed. Elijah didn't answer. The professor went on. They keep pushing diversity hiring. Representation quotas. Putting people in labs who don't belong there. Not based on merit but optics. It's turning the whole discipline into a social experiment. Elijah's eyes stayed on the road. People talk about opportunity, Daniel continued. But there's a difference between opportunity and lowering the bar. Science doesn't care about your background. Either you've got the mind for it or you don't. Still, Elijah said nothing. Daniel sighed, leaning back in his seat. But I guess you hear a lot of things in this line of work. Elijah's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I've heard a few, he replied. Another stretch of silence passed between them. The professor tapped at his screen again, then looked up. Sorry, he said, glancing toward the front. Didn't mean to go on a rant. Long flight. Tired brain. No offense taken, Elijah replied calmly. Just driving. But the professor didn't stop there. You know, I give lectures all over the country. Last month I spoke in Baltimore. The room was filled with students from underrepresented groups. That's the phrase they use now. Not one of them had even read the foundational papers in the field. But they were there, smiling, ready to take over. It's frustrating. All this effort to include everyone. What about the ones who earned their place? Elijah's voice was quiet. And how do you define that? Earning your place. Daniel chuckled. By doing the work. By thinking like a scientist. You know, sometimes I wonder how many brilliant minds we've lost because we've spent too much time looking for them in the wrong places. The cab fell quiet again. They were nearing the city now. The Rockies loomed to the west, snow-capped and ancient. The skyline stretched across the horizon like a man trying to stand taller than he was. Elijah took the next exit. You're in physics? He asked. Astrophysics, Daniel corrected. Gravity wells and dark matter theory. I specialize in convergence equations. Ah, Elijah said. You've heard of it? I've read a few things. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Really? You read about convergence theory? Elijah didn't answer right away. Then he spoke, slow and deliberate. Brooks-Drayton convergence. The expansion model published in '94. That one always stayed with me. The professor leaned forward. What did you just say? Brooks-Drayton convergence, Elijah repeated. It challenged the standard model for temporal gravitational drift. People thought it was too theoretical back then. But the math held up. Daniel's voice went thin. How do you know about that? Elijah turned down a tree-lined street that led to the university. Because I wrote it. The professor froze. Wait, Elijah Brooks? The Elijah Brooks. Elijah didn't turn around. He pulled the cab to a gentle stop in front of the physics building. Students were gathering on the steps, bundled in scarves and eager for the day to begin. He said. Now I just drive. Daniel stared, speechless. Outside, a student knocked on the car window. She waved. Elijah smiled and nodded to her. You're expected inside, he said, glancing back at Daniel. Good luck with the symposium. Professor Daniel Whitmore stepped out of the cab like a man entering a different world. The air outside was brisk, but he hardly noticed. His mind was still inside the taxi, spinning in every direction but forward. Elijah Brooks? That Elijah Brooks? The name alone had been engraved into the bedrock of modern astrophysics. His early work on convergence theory had paved the way for entire generations of research. Students quoted him. Scientists debated him. Some said he had vanished too early, disappeared into obscurity just as he was on the verge of changing the entire gravitational model. But Daniel had assumed, like most had, that Brooks had died or perhaps left the field in disgrace. Rumors floated over the years, burnout, politics, maybe even scandal. No one really knew. And yet here he was, alive, driving a cab. Daniel didn't move until the Crown Vic disappeared down the street, its taillights swallowed by the morning fog. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and made his way inside. The university halls were already buzzing. Posters lined the walls advertising the keynote speakers, including his own name in bold print. Academics in coats and scarves clustered near coffee stands, arguing in low tones about equations and funding and the future. But Daniel couldn't focus. Not entirely. The voice from the back of that cab echoed in his head, calm and deliberate, recalling details of a theory most people only half understood. There had been no arrogance in Elijah's tone. No need to prove himself. Just precision. Like the man hadn't stopped thinking. Like he'd never left. In the symposium lounge, Daniel poured himself a lukewarm cup of coffee and sat near the corner window. The mountains loomed in the distance, quiet and unbothered by human concerns. He watched them, letting the hum of conversation melt into the background. What had driven a mind like that to walk away? What made a Nobel laureate choose to spend his days behind a meter? Across the room, a familiar face approached. "Professor Whitmore," said a woman in a navy blue blouse and long braid. "Good to see you again." "Dr. Halsey," he replied, standing to shake her hand. "Pleasure as always." She motioned to the seat beside him. "May I?" "Of course." She settled in, sipping her drink. "Looking forward to your lecture. You're on just after lunch, I believe?" Daniel nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. "Yes. Still making a few last-minute edits." "You heard who's speaking before you?" He shook his head. "Elijah Brooks." Daniel nearly dropped his cup. "He's here? Speaking?" Dr. Halsey smiled. "You didn't know? He's been consulting with a private climate lab out near Boulder. They've brought him in to model planetary scale feedback loops. Apparently, he's applying quantum convergence models to simulate atmospheric collapse scenarios. Well, it's brilliant. I've read a few early drafts. Groundbreaking work." Daniel sat back, stunned. He disappeared." Halsey looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "He disappeared from the institutions. Not from the work." Daniel cleared his throat. "May I ask, how did he get involved again?" "No idea," she said. "But some think he's always been watching from the sidelines. Publishing anonymously. Reviewing grants. Pulling strings without leaving fingerprints." Daniel's chest tightened. She glanced at her watch. "I'll see you in the auditorium." After she left, Daniel sat in silence. The man he'd casually insulted, dismissed, just hours ago, would now be speaking directly before him. And not as a relic. As a force. Later, in the auditorium, the lights dimmed as Dr. Elijah Brooks took the stage. There was no introduction. No dramatic music. Just a man in a brown coat walking toward the podium with the ease of someone who didn't need to be noticed. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. "I won't speak long. Time's better spent in thought than in applause." His voice filled the room like a current, low, steady, unmistakably clear. The first few slides on the screen showed complex topographical models, layered with heat maps and shifting trajectories. "As the climate continues to move toward instability," he said, "we must begin thinking not just in terms of carbon and methane, but in terms of temporal behavior. The atmosphere does not only respond in layers, it evolves. It remembers." A few heads turned. Elijah pointed to a graph that seemed almost impossible to decipher at first glance. He broke it down effortlessly, pulling the audience along with him. His ideas weren't just advanced, they were visionary. Instead of showing them what was already known, he was introducing the framework for a completely new model of climate dynamics. And the equations, they were beautiful. Daniel couldn't breathe. Here was a man he had called unqualified. A man he'd accused of benefiting from the very systems that had tried to keep minds like his on the outside for generations. Elijah wasn't bitter. He wasn't even smug. He was just better. In every way that counted. At the end of the lecture, the room stood to applaud. Not out of politeness but necessity. Elijah nodded once, then walked off the stage without another word. Daniel's name was called next. He stepped up to the microphone with his notes shaking in his hands. His throat dry. His voice, usually confident, cracked slightly. For the first time in years, Professor Daniel Whitmore felt what it meant to truly be in the presence of greatness. Not the kind polished and groomed by institutions, but the kind forged in silence, unseen, beneath the layers of assumption. The symposium had shifted. The atmosphere in the building was no longer the same. Conversations in the hallways had taken a different tone, quieter, more thoughtful, less boastful. It wasn't that Elijah Brooks had said something controversial. He had simply made it impossible to ignore how much further the human mind could stretch when left unhindered by ego or the need for applause. Professor Daniel Whitmore stood by the coffee station, watching two graduate students argue over Elijah's model. They were too young to have ever read the original Brooks Drayton paper when it was published. They didn't recognize the voice from history until it spoke in front of them. Now their textbooks would have to catch up. A man who had vanished from the academic world for over a decade had returned, and with a single presentation redrawn the map. Daniel stepped outside. The campus air was cold, clean, and sharp. His thoughts refused to settle. He felt something between shame and awe, a bitter cocktail that lingered long after the last applause. For a man so used to being the one who clarified things for others, it was disorienting to suddenly be on the side of confusion. A voice behind him broke the silence. "You didn't mention we'd be seeing each other again, Elijah." Daniel turned around, catching sight of him in the shade of the archway, hands in his coat pockets. Same brown coat. Same stillness. "I didn't know," Daniel replied. "When you dropped me off this morning, I had no idea who you were. I figured." Daniel offered a faint, embarrassed smile. "What you said in there. I've never heard anyone model temporal elasticity inside environmental systems before." Elijah nodded. "It's not really new. Just forgotten." Daniel hesitated. "Why come back now?" he asked. "After all these years?" Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "Because I finally found a lab that doesn't care where I park my car at night." Daniel flinched even though Elijah's tone hadn't changed. It wasn't a jab. It was just a fact. They stood there for a few moments. Two men of science, surrounded by ivy-covered walls and ideas older than either of them. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said. "No, you don't," Elijah replied. "You owe yourself better questions." Daniel swallowed. "Fair." Elijah looked past him toward the distant hills. "You know what it's like to sit in rooms where people talk about minds like yours as if you're not there?" he asked. "To be told how lucky you are to be included, after you've already rewritten their playbook?" Daniel didn't answer. "That's why I left," Elijah said, softer now. "Not because of the system. I already knew how the system worked. I left because I was tired of being brilliant and invisible at the same time." There was no bitterness in his voice. No need for Daniel to feel guilt. Just clarity. "That was worse in a way. But you came back. Only because this research can't afford my pride. We're running out of time and I still have things to say." Pause. "I'm working out of a private lab now. In the foothills. Funded by a tech foundation that doesn't publish names. They want results, not resumes." Daniel blinked. "What exactly are you working on?" Elijah's gaze locked onto his. "A new map of climate collapse. One that doesn't predict what's next. One that shows how long we've already been living in it." Daniel felt his stomach shift. "You think it's already started?" Elijah gave a half shrug. "I don't think. I measure." They stood there in silence as the sun dipped behind the clouds and the temperature began to drop again. "You should come by the lab," Elijah said at last. "You might find something useful there." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Then Elijah turned and walked away, disappearing down the narrow path that cut through the trees behind the auditorium. No fanfare. No crowd. Just footsteps and frost. Daniel watched him go, mind still buzzing with equations and regrets. He would go to that lab. Not just for the science, but because something about Elijah had cracked something open inside him. Something uncomfortable, necessary, and overdue. The assumptions he had walked into that cab with were gone. In their place was a question, one he couldn't yet articulate but felt deep beneath the polished surface of his career. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his hotel room. He didn't turn on the television. Didn't answer his emails. He stared out the window, Denver's skyline glowing in the dark, and thought of the man behind the meter. Not a ghost. Not a myth. But a scientist still working in the shadows, building bridges over a future no one was ready to see. The next morning, Daniel left the hotel before sunrise. He skipped the final lectures of the symposium without telling anyone. His name would still be listed on the program, but he didn't care. He wasn't there for applause anymore. Elijah had given him an address. Just coordinates actually. Latitude and longitude. Tucked into the foothills west of Boulder, far from any official university buildings or corporate campuses. The drive wound through long stretches of pine, the road narrowing into gravel as the elevation rose. He passed a rusted cattle gate, then a winding switchback lined with old wooden poles that looked like they hadn't held a power line in years. Eventually he saw it. The structure was low, hidden beneath a canopy of trees. It looked like it had once been a ranger station, maybe even a cabin. But a closer look told a different story. Solar panels lined the roof. A large satellite dish pointed into the sky, surrounded by smaller antennae pulsing with silent data. And beneath the building, where the slope dropped off into a ravine, a steel trapdoor gleamed under a layer of melting frost. Daniel parked, got out, and stared at the place for a long moment. Then the front door opened. Elijah stood there, coat off, sleeves rolled up. Behind him, warm light spilled out onto the deck, revealing rows of whiteboards, screens, and stacks of handwritten notes. "You made good time," he said. Daniel walked forward. "I was curious." Elijah stepped aside, letting him enter. Inside, the lab looked nothing like a facility. It felt lived in, like someone had been here for years. A pot of coffee simmered on a hot plate. Classical music played softly from a speaker. The far wall was covered in thick paper sheets, some pinned, others taped edge to edge in a mosaic of complex diagrams. And the whiteboards? Daniel stepped closer. "What is this?" he murmured. Elijah picked up a marker and pointed to one of the boards. "This is the current atmospheric entropy model, updated with real-time sensor feedback. That's solar flux deviation mapped over 6 years. And this." He walked to a different board. "This is the part no one wants to admit. We're not entering the crisis. We're inside it." Daniel studied the equations. They were elegant, terrifying. Not just projections, but observed data, simulations layered with patterns of collapse that were no longer theoretical. Elijah handed him a tablet. "These readings are coming from an autonomous array we launched off-grid 3 months ago. High-altitude drones measuring thermal drift, moisture memory, and the decay of atmospheric pressure over glacial zones." Daniel scrolled through the data. It didn't lie. "These feedback loops," he said slowly, "they're irreversible?" Elijah met his eyes. "At this stage, yes. But that doesn't mean we stop." Daniel's fingers tightened on the edge of the tablet. "All these years," he said, "while the rest of us were arguing over grant money and publication rights, you were building this." "I didn't build it alone," Elijah replied. "There are others. People who believed in the work, not the spotlight. We stopped waiting for approval and started moving forward." Quietly, Daniel stared at him. "Why tell me now?" Elijah was quiet for a moment. "Because when you were in that cab, you reminded me of something I used to be afraid of." Daniel blinked. "Afraid of?" Elijah nodded. "Recognition. People seeing me but not really seeing me. They look at the frame, the role, the skin, the accent, and they decide who I am before I speak. But you," he looked directly at Daniel, "you were the first to be wrong and admit it." Daniel exhaled, unsure how to respond. Elijah turned back to the screen. "There's more," he said. "We've been working on a model that predicts microshifts in ecosystem collapse at the community level, how heat, food scarcity, and water salinity will spiral out in the next decade. If we can map it precisely, maybe we can build localized systems that adapt fast enough to hold the line." Daniel stepped closer, absorbed by the modeling interface. It looked like a planet simulator, one that had skipped past the dream of prevention and moved straight into survival. "What do you need?" he asked, voice low. Elijah smiled just a little. "You. If you're willing." Daniel looked at the screen, then around the room. It wasn't a prestigious institute. There were no marble floors or honorary plaques. Just minds that refused to be silenced and a mission that didn't care who got the credit. He nodded once. "I'm in." Outside, the pines swayed gently. The world was still spinning, still heading toward its reckoning. But in that quiet lab beyond the edge of the known, 2 men stood ready to face it, not with hope, but with knowledge. Weeks passed. Winter settled deeper into the Colorado foothills, blanketing the hills in a quiet that muffled the world. Elijah's lab transformed from a solitary outpost into a steady pulse of activity. Daniel adapted quickly. He took over sensor data calibration, cross-referencing Elijah's models with international satellite arrays. Every morning, he brewed coffee at sunrise, scribbled thoughts in a yellow notebook, and added his notes to the expanding wall of truth. The wall had grown. What started as diagrams now resembled a living map, a breathing, evolving portrait of a world unraveling beneath human routines. The predictions weren't just numbers anymore. They had names, places, people. In one corner of the lab, a digital monitor pulsed with red over a section marked Louisiana. "Heat bloom anomaly," Elijah muttered, adjusting the parameters. "That's the 3rd one this month." Daniel leaned closer. "That's not just urban heat. That's aquifer collapse under thermal stress." Elijah nodded grimly. And yet, the public models still list that area as stable. They stood in silence. What do we do with this? Daniel asked finally. If we go public now, the backlash. We don't go public, Elijah interrupted. We don't broadcast. We prepare. The answer surprised Daniel. He'd expected rebellion, a challenge to the institutions that had ignored them. Instead, Elijah's tone was colder, sharper. I've spent too long waiting for people to listen, he continued. Now I build tools for those who already are. Later that night, Elijah sat alone on the back deck of the lab, wrapped in a wool coat, watching the stars. Daniel joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Elijah didn't speak at first. He just stared at the sky like it had secrets worth waiting for. You ever think about why I really left? He said after a long pause. Daniel offered him the coffee, sat beside him. I thought you told me. I told you the professional reason. The academic exhaustion. The fight to be seen. He sipped slowly as if buying time. But the personal reason? He exhaled a mist of breath into the cold air. It was grief. Daniel waited. My wife died 12 years ago. Cancer. Fast, cruel, silent. Daniel's eyes lowered. I didn't know. I stopped everything after that. Couldn't teach, couldn't research, couldn't even breathe some days. The world felt like it didn't need me anymore. Elijah glanced sideways, the lines on his face carved deeper by moonlight. Until one morning I woke up and realized the work wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about her. What she believed. What we dreamed of building together. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that didn't ask for comfort, only presence. Daniel finally spoke. I always assumed you left for pride. Or protest. I never considered the pain. Elijah gave a tired smile. Pain doesn't wear a name tag. People see what they want. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, letting it warm him. So now what? He asked softly. We sit here with the truth, watch the world ignore it? No, Elijah said. We build something it can't ignore. He stood, stepped back inside, and motioned for Daniel to follow. They descended the metal stairs beneath the lab, into the steel-lined chamber that Daniel had seen on his first visit but hadn't yet entered. Now it was lit. Inside, an array of servers blinked in organized clusters. Screens displayed predictive simulations of entire regions, food distribution models, heat stress indexes, local power grid adaptations. In the center stood a strange-looking prototype. It looked like a cube built from reinforced ceramic, with embedded sensors and a filtered air intake. Daniel blinked. What is that? Elijah placed a hand on it. It's a self-contained climate node. Independent energy, filtration, temperature regulation, small-scale food synthesis. Meant for isolated communities hit hardest by collapse. Daniel stepped forward, awe blooming in his chest. You built a survival unit. Not just one, Elijah said. 50. Scattered across vulnerable areas, quietly integrated into shelters and schools. Funded without names, distributed through networks that don't need government permission. Daniel stared at the machine. It was crude but brilliant, a real shot at keeping people alive when the worst began. No one knows you made this? He asked. No one needs to, Elijah said. They just need to survive. Daniel looked at him, really looked. This was not the man from the cap. Not anymore. This was a man who had chosen anonymity over applause, survival over legacy. You're not just mapping the end, Daniel whispered. You're rewriting what comes after. Elijah didn't respond. He just looked at the machine. Sometimes, he said quietly, you save the world one quiet invention at a time. They stood there, surrounded by machines that hummed with purpose. Outside, the stars flickered across the endless black sky. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something solid beneath his feet. Not hope, but resolve. Spring crept into the Colorado foothills with quiet persistence. Snow gave way to cold rain. The pines shed their frost. And deep inside the lab carved into the mountainside, the pulse of invention continued. But it wasn't long before the outside world came knocking. Daniel was the first to notice it. A subtle shift. An email that shouldn't have found him. A conference invitation addressed to a name he hadn't used in months. Then whispers from old colleagues. Messages phrased with curiosity, but loaded with suspicion. They knew he had resurfaced. He brought it up during their morning briefing, watching Elijah review the latest stability readings from a coastal cluster in Vietnam. They're sniffing, Daniel said quietly. Academia, journalists, maybe even government monitors. Something stirred the pot. Elijah didn't look up. It was always going to happen. Daniel frowned. You said we were invisible. No one's invisible forever. He moved to a console, typing in a command that pulled up a distribution map of the climate nodes. 47 had gone live. 3 were still in transit. Daniel stared at the blinking lights. So many years of secrecy. So much ground gained, and now the scent of exposure. They'll come with questions, Daniel said. They'll ask who funded this. Who authorized it? Why no one knew? Elijah gave a faint smile. And we'll answer none of it. Daniel's brow creased. You really think we can keep hiding? I don't intend to hide, Elijah said. I intend to choose how I'm seen. That afternoon, a drone arrived. Not the usual supply craft, but a message courier, an old military model repurposed by private networks. Its payload was a single envelope. Elijah opened it in silence, read its contents, and handed it to Daniel without a word. The letter was from a foundation. Anonymous but deeply informed. They knew about the nodes. They knew about the lab. And more importantly, they offered support, financial, technological, and logistical. On one condition. A partnership. One that came with public visibility. Daniel read it twice. This could scale everything, he murmured. We could multiply the reach tenfold. And burn the whole mission in the process, Elijah said softly. He walked to the window, staring out at the pine-covered valley. Once we accept money tied to identity, we stop controlling the narrative. They'll call it a miracle project. A corporate salvation. The headlines will be clean. The truth will be diluted. Daniel placed the letter down. So we keep quiet? Stay small? We stay sharp, Elijah corrected. And we do what matters. But Daniel wasn't convinced. The longer he worked in that lab, the more he saw the limits of their isolation. The world was fracturing faster than they could stitch it back together. In Asia, crops were failing under record-breaking heat domes. In Africa, migration waves were colliding with dying rivers. Even in Colorado, seasonal patterns were unraveling. He voiced his doubts one night, sitting on the lab's roof, surrounded by stars. We need allies, he said. Real ones. With reach. Elijah sat beside him, quiet for a while. Do you remember what it felt like, he said at last, when you first published your breakthrough paper? Before the awards. Before the backlash. Daniel nodded. I felt invincible. Me too, Elijah said. And then, I watched the system chew it up. Water it down. Make it palatable. Safe. He turned toward Daniel, his voice firm. I will not let that happen again. Daniel looked down at the forest below. He understood. But part of him still believed they were running out of time. The next day, an unmarked black car appeared at the far edge of the access road. The camera system flagged it before it came into view. No plates. Tinted windows. It stopped. Waited. Then reversed slowly and disappeared. Elijah stood by the monitor, his face unreadable. They're watching now, he said. It begins. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his forehead. What do we do? Elijah looked at him with the same fire he'd carried the day they met. We stay ahead of the noise. We finish the last 3 nodes. We deploy them. And then, if the world wants answers. He paused. They'll have to take a ride with the man behind the meter. Daniel's expression shifted. A grin broke across his face. You're still that guy, huh? Elijah shrugged. Depends on the day. Depends on the passenger. They stood side by side in front of the terminal, screens flickering with simulated futures. Behind them, machines whirred. Data flowed. The plan moved forward, even as shadows gathered. Outside, the wind howled across the pines as if whispering secrets into the dark. The world was listening now. But Elijah and Daniel had stopped caring about permission. The first knock came at dawn. Not a metaphorical one. A literal fist rapping on the steel door of Elijah's hidden lab. Daniel was the one who heard it. He had fallen asleep at his desk again, surrounded by printouts, satellite captures, and code running in loops. When the noise echoed up the staircase, he jumped to his feet, pulse spiking. By the time Elijah joined him, the cameras had already identified the visitors. 2 men. Suits. Clean shoes out of place on a gravel mountain trail. One held a slim briefcase. The other wore the tired smile of a man used to being obeyed. Federal, Elijah muttered. But not agents. Policy? Daniel asked. Probably intelligence under the guise of infrastructure oversight. Let them in. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You sure? Elijah nodded once. I want to hear their pitch. They opened the main door and let the morning air flood the entryway. The taller of the 2 men stepped forward and offered a hand. Elijah Brooks? he asked, already knowing the answer. My name is Paul. This is Martin. We're here on behalf of a multi-agency climate initiative tasked with monitoring unsanctioned technology deployments. Elijah gave a slow nod. I see. And what exactly do you believe I've deployed? Martin, the one with the briefcase, stepped forward. We know about the nodes. The moment stretched. Daniel didn't blink. Elijah didn't flinch. We know about the hardware, Martin continued. We know about the data uplinks. And we're not here to shut you down. That was new. Then what are you here for? Elijah asked, voice flat. Paul gave a calm, rehearsed smile. We're here to invite you to participate in shaping the next generation of national climate resilience strategy. You've built something extraordinary, Dr. Brooks. But it needs regulation, oversight, integration. Daniel scoffed. You want to put it in a box. We want to protect it, Martin said quickly. If it stays in the shadows, it risks being destroyed, dismissed, or worse, copied poorly by others. Elijah stepped back, folding his arms. What do you get in return? Paul's answer came without hesitation. Stability, legitimacy, protection, and resources beyond what you currently have. Our networks could launch this globally in months. Daniel and Elijah exchanged a long glance. Then Elijah turned, walking back toward the lab's main terminal. He gestured for them to follow. Inside, he pulled up a set of models, forecasts no agency had seen. Scenarios 3 steps beyond the current climate horizon. No dates, just data, just possibilities. You see this? Elijah asked, pointing to a cluster of collapsing feedback loops across South America. This isn't next year. This is next season. You think bureaucracy can outrun this? Paul looked rattled. With your help. You don't want my help, Elijah interrupted. You want my silence. You want to absorb the project so it becomes yours. Your story. Your spin. No one's trying to silence you. Then why are you standing in my lab with a federal satellite key code and a silence clause buried in your briefcase? Martin stiffened. That's confidential. And I cracked it 30 minutes before you arrived, Elijah said sharply. You came with a contract, not a conversation. Daniel stepped closer now, voice low and controlled. This project was built in the dark because the light was corrupted. And it worked. You don't get to walk in here with a handshake and a stamp and expect a seat at the table. Paul's smile faltered. Martin closed the briefcase. You'll be hearing from our office, Paul said quietly. I'm sure we will, Elijah replied. They left without another word. Hours passed. The quiet returned, but it was a different quiet now. Heavier. Tighter. That evening, Elijah sat in the garage, the place where the first node had been built. He ran a hand along the shell of the prototype. Daniel entered and leaned against the doorframe. You know they'll try again, he said. Elijah nodded. They'll pressure you, discredit you, maybe even dismantle it all. Another nod. Daniel looked at the taxi parked nearby. Dusty, scratched, but still intact. You ever think about driving again? Elijah smiled faintly. I never really stopped. He stood, walked over to the taxi and opened the driver's door. I drove to disappear. Then I drove to survive. Now. He slid into the seat, hand resting on the worn steering wheel. Now I drive because it reminds me I can still choose my direction. Daniel opened the passenger door and sat beside him. So where to next? Elijah glanced at him, then at the open garage door. Wherever the meter takes us. They sat in the stillness for a moment longer, two men surrounded by machines the world didn't understand. Behind them the servers hummed. Outside the wind shifted. Then Elijah reached forward, clicked the meter on, and the ride continued. The end. 7 moral lessons from the man behind the meter. The power of anonymity in innovation. One of the central themes of The Man Behind the Meter is Elijah's choice to work in the shadows, outside the public eye, even though he possesses groundbreaking knowledge. His decision to build solutions without seeking fame or accolades challenges the commonly held belief that success requires recognition. Elijah's story teaches us that innovation doesn't always need to be accompanied by public acclaim. Sometimes, the greatest contributions to society come from people who work quietly in the background, driven by passion rather than the desire for praise. By staying anonymous, Elijah is able to retain control over his work, ensuring it isn't diluted or misused by external forces. This lesson encourages us to evaluate why we create, whether for visibility or for the intrinsic value of making the world a better place. Crisis can lead to unlikely opportunities. When Elijah faced a personal crisis, the loss of his wife and the subsequent collapse of his career, He could have withdrawn entirely from the world. Instead, he channeled his grief into something greater, using his pain to fuel his work. The story underscores that hardship, while often devastating, can also be a powerful motivator. Elijah's resilience in the face of personal loss highlights the idea that adversity can lead to moments of profound change, innovation, and self-discovery. For those going through their own crises, it serves as a reminder that while the path may seem insurmountable at times, new opportunities may arise from the most unexpected sources. Questioning the status quo throughout the story, Elijah repeatedly confronts established systems, institutions, and authorities that have ignored the urgent issues he's addressing. Whether it's the governmental agencies or academic institutions, Elijah's journey challenges the belief that those in power always know best. His decision to work outside the system to bring about change suggests that true progress often requires questioning the status quo and stepping outside of conventional methods. This lesson encourages us to think critically about the systems and structures in which we operate and whether they genuinely serve the greater good. Sometimes, breaking away from traditional frameworks can be the key to creating real, lasting change. The value of humility in leadership. Elijah's leadership is rooted not in authority or hierarchy, but in humility. Even though he is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, he does not flaunt his achievements. His ability to lead without ego, letting his work speak for itself, offers a profound lesson in humility. Leadership, true leadership, is not about making others follow you or constantly proving your worth. It's about fostering an environment where the focus is on the collective good, not personal recognition. By staying grounded, Elijah ensures that his work remains focused on the mission, not on individual accolades. This teaches us that the most effective leaders are often the ones who don't need to assert their power but instead empower others and allow their actions to reflect their values. Self-reliance and integrity in the face of pressure. As the government and corporate entities attempt to co-opt his work, Elijah's steadfast commitment to his values and his refusal to compromise on his principles demonstrate the importance of self-reliance and integrity. Elijah is presented with opportunities to expand his project through partnerships that would offer financial gain, resources, and recognition. However, he refuses to sell out, knowing that doing so would dilute the essence of his work. His refusal to accept the terms of those who want to control his invention teaches the importance of maintaining integrity in the face of external pressures. This lesson serves as a reminder that standing firm in your values, even when the world is offering easy solutions, can be the path to creating meaningful, lasting change. The invisible work that shapes the future. Elijah's work is never visible to the masses, yet it has the potential to alter the course of history. He operates in the background, focusing on building solutions for communities without fanfare or recognition. The story reminds us that many of the world's most crucial advancements, whether in science, technology, or social progress, come from individuals who prefer to work quietly. Their efforts are often not celebrated until much later, but they are no less important. It teaches us to value the invisible contributions of others, and to understand that real change often occurs out of sight, outside the spotlight, and without the loud clamor of publicity. This lesson inspires us to appreciate the unsung heroes in our lives and communities. The importance of rewriting one's own narrative. Elijah's rejection of conventional paths, from his early days in academia to his exit from the spotlight and eventual return to building sustainable solutions, speaks to the power of taking control of one's narrative. Throughout the story, he rewrites his story time and time again, refusing to let his identity be defined by others. When faced with societal expectations of success and conformity, Elijah chooses a different way, one that is uniquely his. This theme encourages us to take ownership of our own stories, reminding us that we are not bound by external expectations or the roles others try to impose on us. It's about reclaiming the narrative and choosing how we want to define ourselves, even if it means stepping off the traditional path. These lessons from the man behind the meter serve as a reminder of the power of humility, resilience, integrity, and the quiet, persistent work that changes the world. Through Elijah's story, we learn that while the road less traveled is not always easy, it can be the most meaningful and impactful. It's a call to action for anyone who has ever felt overlooked or undervalued, reminding them that their contributions, no matter how quiet or unseen, are shaping the future in ways they may never fully comprehend. And that brings us to the end of The Man Behind the Meter. We hope you've enjoyed this story of resilience, innovation, and the power of staying true to your path, no matter the challenges you face. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you found inspiration or learned something valuable from this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more content like this, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How did Elijah's journey resonate with you? What lesson did you take away from his story? Let's keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed this, be sure to check out our other videos for more motivational stories and life lessons that will inspire and empower you. Thank you again for being here. Until next time, keep believing in your potential and the quiet power you carry.